broadcast system announcing the commencement of the annual purge sanctioned by the U.S. government. Weapons of Class 4 and lower have been authorized for use during the purge. All other weapons are restricted. Government officials of ranking 10 have been granted immunity from the purge and shall not be harmed. Commencing at the siren, any and all crime, including murder, will be legal for 12 continuous hours. Police, fire, and emergency medical services will be unavailable until tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. when the purge concludes. Blessed be our new founding fathers and America, a nation reborn. May God be with you all.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's Grizzly and Ginette. How you doing, Ginette?
Good. How are you?
Well, the storms have knocked the power out, but guess what, ladies and gentlemen? We are a little bit late, but we are live. I got my little lantern right here. My little light, you know, my little light. You got to have these. So
you look like
everything with power banks and everything else. So I do apologize, ladies and gentlemen. You know, I get always excited anytime that we talk about Angela Ford, right? I mean, she's like outstanding. And it's always amazing because you never know, Ginette, what she's going to bring to her show. Am I right?
Absolutely, you're right.
So tonight, Angela Ford. Angela, I know you're backstage. Everybody's been waiting on me. Hello, Angela.
Yeah, I'm here. How do I get
How are
in?
you? Well, welcome back. Everybody has been like asking about you, so hopefully y'all can hear me okay.
How
But
do I get in?
I mean, my emails have been blowing up. Where's Angela? We want Angela back. Bring her back on the show. You know, they just love you to death. So it's amazing.
Let's see if she can hear you. Angela, can you hear?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I'm in. Am I in?
Yeah, we're live. We're hot and live right now. Everybody's watching this. Now, Ginette, I understand you have a special guest for us tonight, right?
Well, I think Angela brought him in. Yes.
Right.
Well,
yeah, so who's our special guest?
So we're bringing in Scott. I guess his last name is Carmichael. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, Scott Carmichael. That is correct.
I hope I pronounced it right. Okay, so right, he worked for the government. Angela worked, I guess, off and on with him, and we're going to find out the details any minute. So welcome, Scott.
Yeah, so I'm going to bring Scott on here. Let me, Scott sent me a heck of a bio. Let me just try to bring that up really quick here. Let me mute this so I don't echo in the background. And I want to read this because it's very, very entertaining and interesting. Angela's involvement was, you know, like we said before, was remote viewer, right, for the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. And of course, I just clicked on a button, sorry. So I just kind of lost everything. Trying to do this in the dark is amazing, ladies and gentlemen. So this is the true person that has been proven results for her country during the Cold War era. Now, Angela Ford does it once again. Now we have Mr. Scott Carmichael himself. The role he played in our government that are, well, actually what we're allowed to know, blows a brief background on the YouTube channels and all of our broadcasts. He sent this to me, and I'm not going to even read it all because there's so much. I want him to tell it himself, right? So he was born and raised in a small town in Wisconsin and graduated from high school in 1968, which he says it makes him 72 years of age as of today. Now, I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, I'm looking at him right now backstage, and he does not look 72 years old. Look, all that lightning, electricity is making me fluffy. So I apologize. Let's see here. He served as an enlisted man in the Navy from 1969 to 1973 during the Vietnam War. During boot camp in San Diego, he scored well on a foreign language aptitude test. So the Navy sent him to Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California.
Monterey.
Yeah, for a 47-week course. Wow, in Chinese-Mandarin. Now,
Oh,
that is
wow.
something. Now, my grandfather used to be able to speak Chinese, but I don't know that fluent. Upon graduation in 1971 in February, he completed some technical training and was first assigned to a small Navy communication station in the Philippines. That's where he was collecting intelligence on the PRC Navy and then to similar posts on Okinawa. He also volunteered for 2 special assignments, temporary duty assignments on board American submarines. I don't know how, ladies and gentlemen, I don't think I can do submarines. That's too close, too compact. Including Wahoo SS-565 and how do you pronounce that? Gudgeon SS-568 to collect intelligence against on the PRC Navy. After mustering out his naval service, he graduated from the University of Washington. We earned a BA degree in East Asian Studies with employment as a police officer in a small town in Wisconsin. Worked the night shifts from 1977 to 1984. In 1984, he accepted Investigative Services, NCIS, which we all love to watch on TV. And then they called it the Naval Investigative Services, NIS. He was initially signed to NIS office on the naval station at Treasure Island in the middle of San Francisco Bay. Then, on top of that, he became a counterintelligence specialist, provided CIA support to Ivy Bells, the CIA, NSA, USN Black Program, which employed specially configured by U.S. submarines operating out of Mare Island to tap into Soviet undersea communications, which ran between the Soviet Navy base on, I cannot pronounce the word, Vladivostok, to their headquarters on the mainland. In 1986, NIS transferred him to NIS Headquarters, where he served for 2 years as a desk officer in counterintelligence directorate, monitoring and providing support to NIS counterintelligence investigations in various regions of the world in 1968. You know what? This is Mr. Carmichael. Welcome to the show. I tell you what, there's so much impressive.
Too much.
They're dying just to hear from you. So welcome.
Well, thank
you.
you.
I apologize. I'm without power, but we're live.
Welcome. I'm glad to be here. Yeah.
So yeah,
I want to tell you the rest of the
history about you. It's very interesting. Everybody out there says hello. Ginette, somebody saying hello to you. Angela, same thing. So I'm just letting you know people are hollering at us. But yeah, take it over, sir.
Okay, well, in 1988, I accepted employment as a special agent for the Defense Intelligence Agency, which had just created a new unit to look for spies within the agency. So I was one of 4 investigators who were hired to perform that mission. And I worked in that capacity for DIA until my retirement in 2014. So I've been retired for 8 or 9 years now. And during the course of that, I finally met Angela.
Unbelievable.
So what I'd like to do today is tell you about 2 investigations that I worked where Angela provided significant input. We would not have gotten any results without her. So,
really?
Yeah. So if you're ready for that, I'll get into that.
Hey, Mr. Carmichael, the whole show's about you. Take it away.
Okay. Well, hold on a second. In any event, I think it was Angela's program ran until 1995.
And what program was that?
Stargate.
Stargate.
Stargate program. And it was a black program. It was very hush-hush. And I, even though I'd been hired by DIA in 1988, I'd never heard of it. Never even heard of it. And most people didn't. I didn't learn about it until 1999, years after the program had been terminated.
Wow.
And here's what happened.
It was a special access program, so you have to have certain clearances to know about it. So
Right.
even though I was working in Stargate as a psychic, many people in the intelligence community, if they didn't have access
Right.
or read on to that program or the clearances, they wouldn't know about it.
And even though
So
by
they just see
19,
y'all just walking around, didn't know who you were then, right?
that's correct.
Wow.
By 1999, I was the senior counterintelligence investigator for the agency, and I still hadn't ever heard of it. And then in about middle of January 1999, I received a telephone call from a security supervisor named Carl Glassbrenner. I didn't work for Carl, but I knew him, and he asked me to come down to his office. When I got there, Carl told me that he was working on a special project, and during the course of that project, he developed some information that he wanted me to pass along to my colleagues at the State Department, counterintelligence specialists. So what he told me was, well, apparently there was some kind of a technical device, perhaps a tracking device, that was placed in some kind of a bag or package, possibly a diplomatic pouch, at the American Embassy, and I think it was Bucharest. And that pouch made its way to somewhere in New York City. And that was it. And I asked Carl, well, when did this happen? And he said, I have no idea. I said, you don't have any more details? And he says, this is all I've got. And I said, well, that's not exactly actionable intelligence. And how'd you get this? And that's when he told me about Angela. And my immediate reaction was to refuse. I said, I'm not taking this to the State Department. I had a reputation in the counterintelligence community by then, which is a small community. And I was afraid that if I took this to them and told them I got it from a psychic, I'd become a laughingstock in my community. So I told them, absolutely not. You can keep your information. But then he spent some time telling me about Angela and some of the amazing things that she had accomplished in her career. And so that piqued my interest a little bit, but I still refused. Now, as it happened, within a couple of weeks, we had what we call a walk-in event. And a walk-in event is where someone walks into a foreign embassy overseas, claims to be an American, and attempts to sell classified information to a foreign government, where you don't know who the person is. It's called an unsub or unknown subject. So that occurred just a couple of weeks. I believe it was on the 18th of January, 1999. This guy walked into the Singaporean embassy in Bangkok, claimed to be an American named Jeff Baker, and claimed to work for the National Imagery and Mapping Agency, NEMA, at the time. And he provided an imagery flat, classified flat, to a Singaporean military attaché, and told him he had access to lots more that they would be interested in and wanted to sell it to him for $500,000.
Whoa.
Well, the military attaché told me he didn't have any money and he'd have to check on this with his superiors. And so the guy gave the military attaché a Hotmail account that they could communicate with him in. Now, a few weeks later, the Singaporeans decided to turn this entire matter over to the United States, and they gave it to the U.S. Defense Attache in Singapore. Now, as you may or may not know, defense attaches overseas are actually DIA employees. And so the offices they work for, defense attache offices, are DIA offices assigned to more than 100 American embassies overseas. So that's how I became aware of the walk-in event. Even though it didn't actually directly impact DIA, I learned about the event. Now, the case was turned over to an espionage squad at the FBI's Washington field office, and I had worked a great deal with those guys for more than a decade. I knew them very well. So I provided some limited support for them for a few days at the beginning of their investigation. But then, of course, I walked away from it because it had nothing to do with us. But I thought, I wonder if this psychic that Carl was working with might be able to do something with this. I mean, I was just curious. And so I talked to my boss about it, and he had no objection. But I had to go all the way up my chain of command to the chief of security at DIA, who was aware of Angela. He knew about the psychic program, and he referred me to our office of general counsel. So I talked to one of our lawyers, and the lawyer eventually said, look, you can't do this officially. We can't condone this, if you will, because the director of DIA would have to inform Congress and then justify the use of the psychic on a case that has nothing to do with DIA. So finally, the answer was, if you want to do this at all, Scott, you have to make it a personal endeavor, a personal attempt, just to find out what would happen. Now, everybody up and down my chain of command was very interested. They wanted to know what the results might be, so they encouraged me to go ahead and do this. I went back down and I talked to Carl Glassbrenner. Now, Carl And Angela had been involved in a special project for quite some time. And I don't know if you know how they worked at the time, but they used a target envelope. And a target envelope essentially is you take either a photograph or a piece of information you're interested in, put it into an envelope, seal it, put that inside another envelope, seal it, and then use that as a target. A monitor, who's essentially a note taker, would go into a room with Angela, put the envelope in the middle of the table. Angela would be allowed to touch it, but she would not be allowed to hold it up to the light or never open it.
Right.
And then she would perform a psychic session on it. And the note taker would simply take notes. Now, Carl, I didn't tell Carl the details of what I had, but I asked him whether she might be willing to do this. And he said, well, to his knowledge, Angela had never been tasked with a scenario like this before. But he was curious too as to what might happen. So he instructed me on how to make a target envelope, which I did. And Carl had a big stack of target envelopes for his project, and he just slipped it in near the top and not on the top. And he said, well, when they get around to doing it, I'll give you a call and we'll tell you what the results are. So a few work days later, Carl called me down to his office, and the monitor at that time was a guy named Bob Betts, a man that Angela knows well. And he came into Carl's office with a legal pad, and I sat down next to him, and the first thing he said was, well, there's some kind of a security investigation, and counterintelligence is trying to identify somebody. And I just about fell out of my chair. And I took that legal pad out of Bob's hands because I could not believe it. We hadn't told anybody anything. Even Carl didn't know these details. And
Wow.
and so he had a couple pages of notes, and there was a lot of notes, but nothing. What I was expecting, what I was hoping for, is that the psychic would give me the name. You know, that's what I want. What's the name of the person who walked in? But she didn't do that. She gave a lot of information, but nothing I could use to identify the guy. So I was a little disappointed, and I went back to my office. I tended to be a very busy guy back in those days. I was very busy. But it occurred to me that maybe the walk-in was a DIA employee. I needed to check that out because we had imagery analysts as well. So I checked it out, and as it would happen, we did have a DIA employee who arrived in Bangkok the day before the walk-in, and he was there in a hotel just up the street from the Singaporean embassy. And the day after the walk-in, he flew up to Chiang Mai, which is where the United States has a consulate. He was going to go to work up there for a while. And as it happened, he was a former employee of NEMA, and he was an imagery analyst with access to that kind of imagery. So I thought, oh my gosh, this might be the guy. So I contacted my buddy over at the FBI. The squad leader at that time was a guy named Tony Buckmeyer, and I'd worked with Tony for about a decade. And what I did is I made a photocopy or a copy of this employee's security badge, had his photograph on it. And I gave that to Tony with the details and asked him to show it to the Singaporeans to see if that was the guy who walked in. And then what I did is I went back to my office and I made another duplicate of that guy's security badge. And I put that in an envelope along with a question, where was this man on the 18th of January, 1999? And made a target envelope out of it and gave it to Carl. Now, keep in mind, Angela had no idea. She'd never met me, had never heard of me, had no idea that somebody else was putting these target envelopes in the middle of a pile. So she did another psychic session on it. And this time she came back and it seemed like she was all over the map. She was talking about a guy who was smuggling drugs from Mexico, and he was flying a Cessna, and he drove around in a certain kind of car, and he had a brother in Oregon. And I sat in on the back brief on this session, and I said, I don't know where this psychic is coming from, but this is crazy. I said, this has nothing to do with what I'm interested in. So I was about to walk away from it entirely, and Carl talked me out of it. Carl said, look, she seemed to hit the right target, the first envelope. And what he said was, you know, Angela's right on target about 30% of the time. And when she's on target, she is really on target. So he said, why don't you give it another try? So we did it a third time. And this was in February of 1999. And this time it was as though Angela had been a fly on the wall during the walk-in event.
No way.
She said, this man identified himself as Baker. She was right. He was wearing a disguise, and she described the disguise, a certain kind of hat, like a bush hat, sunglasses, a scarf, and like a Nehru jacket or something like that, because he was afraid he'd be recognized. Asked for a lot of money, didn't get it. When he left there, she said, what he was saying to himself was, I did it. I can't believe I just did it. And gave a lot of details. Now, she gave a lot of details I didn't know. So I called my buddy Tony Buckmeyer over at the FBI, and I asked him if this guy was wearing a disguise. And Angela was absolutely right on the money. So I thought, okay, now, and one of the things that Angela told us during that third session was, the guy you're looking for is either Australian or closely associated with the Australians. So I went over to Tony. Tony gives me his information, and he says, by the way, we've opened up a case. We found a guy named Baker who works for NEMA right here in town, and we've got a full investigation on him. So when the FBI opens a full investigation, that means they're on you 24 hours a day. They were on this guy. And I thought, well, that's a little odd because Angela said he's associated with the Australians, but I didn't think much of it. Tony told me that the FBI was communicating with that guy through his Hotmail account. So I asked him for a copy of one of his messages. I told him a lie. I told him, well, I think maybe my IT people can make something of this. So he gave it to me, and I made another target envelope out of that. So on the 22nd of February, Angela performed her fourth and final session on this envelope. And she told us the FBI is communicating with this man through an electronic means that flows through San Francisco. His handle has a lot of numbers in it, which it did. And then she said, now keep in mind, this is the 22nd of February. Okay. She said the last weekend in March, which would be a month and a half later, the FBI is going to meet him in an undercover capacity in Bangkok. And then she said, in the middle of May, which is months later, the FBI is going to arrest this guy in a sting operation somewhere in the DC area. And I heard that, and I just washed my hands of it. I said, Carl, the FBI's got a full case right here on the guy right here in town. He's not in Australia, and they don't have to meet him in Bangkok. And what's this? She's looking into the future stuff. I said, I've never heard of anything like that. So I just walked away. I did. I considered the experiment at that time to be a failure, but an interesting exercise. And I was a very busy guy back then. I was a senior CI guy, and we have operations all over the world. And so I was just juggling lots of cases everywhere at the time. So 6 weeks goes by. I got a call from an FBI agent named Dave Lambert. Now, Dave worked on Tony Buckmeyer's squad, and I had heard of him by reputation. Dave was one of the most senior and experienced FBI agents they had, the Washington field office. And he was the kind of guy I would hope to meet someday. He called me up on a Friday and asked me if I would come into my office to meet him there the next day on Saturday. Now, the FBI had never asked me to go in on a weekend before. He didn't tell me what it was about, but I did. So I met him the next day, and he says, hey, Scott, you remember helping us out in this case a couple of months ago, the walk-in in Bangkok? And I said, well, yeah, I remember that. He says, well, we just had an undercover agent meet with that guy in Bangkok. Our FBI agent was pretending to be a Singapore intelligence officer, gave the guy $20,000 for the imagery flat that he already provided, and then we asked for his ID, and he provided a Canadian passport. And we went to the Canadians, and they confirmed the passport was good. The guy's a Canadian citizen, but the problem was they didn't know where he was, and they had no idea how he would get his hands on classified imagery from the United States. So David asked me to come to the office to run some indices checks on our mainframe computers, see whether we had any reference to the guy so that they might get a line on where he is. I thought, that's easy enough. It was a weekend and nobody else was on the system. So I queried for the guy's name, and it was Jean-Philippe Wispelaire. And just instantly I got 50 hits, which means our mainframes contained 50 messages that had reference to somebody by that name. So I pulled it up, and I hit some function keys, and I found his name, And I started reading the first message, and sure enough, it was an imagery report on a target in Thailand. And so I toggled over to the next message, I did this 5 or 6 times. Every single one of them was an imagery report from that part of the world. I said, well, Dave, this is your guy. I said, let me print this out for you. And it's going to take about 10 minutes to warm up my printer and print out 50 messages. In the meantime, I wanted to go back and take a closer look at these messages. Ordinarily, when I would pull up a message on the system, I would look at the header first, which tells you who sent it and who went to. And so I did that. And when I pulled it up, it said, from DIO Canberra. Oh. Now, my agency is called DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. We have sister agencies in friendly parts of the world. And in Australia, it's called the DIO, the Defense Intelligence Organization, based in Canberra. I looked at that, and that is when I had my first thought of Angela. I thought, oh my God, Angela told us this guy might be Australian. So I said, Dave, are you sure this guy is Canadian? And he said, yeah, we converted through Canadian. I said, well, but you can't find him in Canada? He said, no. I said, well, that's because you're not looking in the right place. This guy's in Australia. I said, you need to go downtown, go to the Australian embassy, talk to your counterpart. He'll help you find this guy. I said, this guy's at the DIO in Canberra. He couldn't believe it. And so what I did was the Australians were authorized access to what we call Intel Link, which is like an internal internet in the intelligence community.
But also too, I think you confirmed that he had dual citizenship.
Yeah,
Australian and Canadian.
Yeah, we learned that later. And so what I told Dave, Dave couldn't believe it. And I said, well, look, Dave, they're part of a commonwealth. I said, it's very easy for a Canadian citizen to get Australian citizenship, to work in their military, their intelligence committee, whatever. I said, you need to listen to me. So I went on Intel Link, and I found the unit that he was assigned to, with all the names of every one of their employees and their phone numbers. So I gave that to Dave. I said, you talk to these people, they know who this guy is. So, and then I recalled that he said they just had an undercover meeting. I said, when was that meeting? He said, well, it was Thursday, which was the 1st of April. Now, Angela had said the last weekend in March. So I said, Dave, was that meeting originally scheduled to be earlier? And he said, well, yeah, our FBI technicians couldn't get to Bangkok in time to wire up the hotel with video and audio, so we put it off for a week.
Wow.
It was originally scheduled for the 26th of March. Now, the bottom line on this is that, yeah, the FBI finally lured him to Washington, D.C. They arrested him in a sting operation out of Dulles Airport on the 15th of May. Angela said he would be arrested in middle of May, 15th of May.
Wow.
And that is when I became a believer in Angela Ford. Now, up until then, I got to tell you that I had never consulted with a psychic before. I'd never called a psychic hotline. That just wasn't me. And I would say I'm just this side of skeptical in the beginning, but that made a believer out of me. And I didn't tell the FBI right away. I knew that if I told them anything about this, they might make a note in their file. And then if this thing went to trial, a defense attorney would make a mockery out of their entire case. So I waited until Whistle was convicted a couple of years later. And after he'd gone through the debriefing process by the FBI, then I went over to Tony Buckmeyer and I showed him Bob Betts's rough notes and explained the whole thing to him. And he was just floored. He was, I think, amused because I had a bit of a reputation as being kind of a rogue character anyway over at DIA. Well, the FBI is very regimented. I mean, people just don't understand. FBI agents are not allowed to do anything without permission. And sometimes they have to get permission from 3 or 4 supervisors to do anything.
Wow.
I had carte blanche. I mean, my bosses trusted me. I always consulted with my attorneys before doing anything. And so I would just go ahead and do stuff. And so I helped the FBI in hundreds of cases during the 1990s. And many of them unsub cases. And they loved working with me because once they gave me an assignment, I would just run off and dig up all kinds of information. And then when I would turn it over to them, they'd have to go to their squad leaders and say, I don't know, Carmichael, he just goes crazy. Look at all this information. I didn't tell him he could do this. In any event, So I told Tony about the Wistful Air case, and he was amused and probably a little concerned, but that was the end of it. Now, as it happened, sometime in the late 1998, I'd been providing assistance to a young FBI agent named John Harris on an unknown subject case that he was working, unsub case. And I think the predicating information on this case was classified at the time. And even though it's been 25 years, my guess is that the FBI probably still considers it to be classified. So I have to be careful about what I put out on this thing. But
Right.
in essence, the case was this. It came from a sensitive source who was deemed to be reliable. That means that the source had provided good information in the past on other issues, which had been proven to be accurate. So this was deemed to be good information. And all the information was this, that at some time during the spring of 98, and we knew the date, an American military guy, we knew his rank, but we didn't know what branch of service he was in. We didn't know if he was Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marine Corps, but we knew his rank. Met in a capital city in Asia with a very senior foreign military intelligence officer. The foreign officer specifically requested to have a meeting with this particular American agent. And we know that he had a number of people with him who were providing counterintelligence, counter-surveillance support. So this was a very important meeting. But that's all we had. That's all we had. And, I went to the Defense Manpower Data Center and I identified every person in the military by that rank, and provided that to John. And I identified a number of people with that appropriate rank who had transited through Bangkok in the approximate time frame. They checked them all out. Everybody was good. But at the end of the day, John had to just close the case. Now, typically what the FBI will do is they won't, officially close the case. It's remanded in an inactive status, pending the receipt of additional information. So it's kind of put up on the shelf. It's not actively worked. Nobody's working it. But if someday some new information comes in, well, then maybe they'll reopen the case. Well, this case really bothered me. And like I said, I'd worked hundreds of these cases with FBI, especially in the early 90s. And what bothered me about this case was the fact that it was a very, very senior military intelligence officer who met with this American agent. That just doesn't happen. Everybody's aware of the fact that CIA has clandestine case officers. They recruit spies, that kind of thing. DIA does the same thing. Our DIA case officers are trained by the CIA. They are operational controlled by CIA out in the field. And our targets are foreign military officers. So I worked in that area for quite a while. I was fairly familiar with the way those things are conducted. And I knew that flag officers, general officers, would never meet with a foreign asset, especially overseas. Too dangerous.
Right.
That's why most case officers are, you might have a captain, majors, most of them, maybe a lieutenant colonel, but most of them are junior, and there's a reason for that. If they meet with an agent overseas and they're caught, the United States government has to have some plausible deniability. You've got to be able to say, oh, well, this is a young guy. He didn't know what he was doing. He exceeded his brief. We'll take him back and punish him ourselves. Okay, so you have plausible deniability. But if you have a general officer and he's caught in a clandestine meeting, there's no plausible deniability. General officers know what they're doing. And so this was extremely, extremely rare. And what it suggested to me was this agent, whoever he was very special, which means bad news for the United States. So I went to one of our senior counterintelligence analysts at DIA, and I ran the scenario past him, and he agreed. He says, this guy is really bad. He thought up several scenarios which could explain why this general would want to have a meeting with him, but they were all bad. This guy is really bad. So, boy, that bothered me. That's just the way I am. I don't like letting go of things like that. So I only had a few pages of notes on this case, and I put it in a file, and I put it right on the corner of my desk. And I thought, someday some little tidbit of information is going to come my way, and maybe I'll be able to find this guy. Well, people today are used to the internet, and there's so much information that's available on the internet, but you have no idea how much information is available to the intelligence community.
You heard it, ladies and gentlemen. You heard it.
I mean, it's incredible. And I thought, well, sooner or later, maybe something will cross my desk and I'll be able to get something on this guy, but it never did. And it occurred to me to task Angela in this case. So I went to my boss and he said, no, if they wouldn't let you do it with the Whisper Air case, they're not going to let you do it officially on this case. So I ran that all the way up the chain, and that was the answer. No, the director will never give you authority. So I thought, well, maybe some information will come in. That went on for years until December of 2004. So I'm talking February, March of 1999 until December 2004. And at that time, my boss, and I had this case on our books as an open case, see? And my boss was having to justify it all the time. But every 3 months, he'd have to explain to his boss why we're still looking at this. So in December of 2004, my boss told me, that's it. You haven't made any progress on this thing, and I'm going to close this thing down. I have to. So I ran up up my chain asking whether I could use Angela, and I talked to everybody. And the answer came back again is no. But again, our office general counsel said, if you want to go ahead and just give it a shot, personally, that's fine, but it's not going to be official. I don't care. I just want information, and I told this once to Angela as an aside here, just so you understand where I'm coming from. I once told Angela, I didn't care how she got her information. I don't understand it. Angela tried to explain it once to me. She's got a theory, which sounded good, but I once told her, I don't care how you do it. I don't care if you take a bucket of goat's blood and throw in some chicken bones and boil it and toss it onto a table and read the patterns. I don't want to hear about it either. The only thing I'm interested in is accurate information. Give me that and I'm a happy guy. So they said, go ahead with this. So here's what I did. I made up a target envelope. And up until this time, from 1999 until early 2005, I'd never met Angela. I'd done this case with Carl Glassbender, but I never met Angela. Never talked to her. She had no idea I was in the background. So I called her up and we arranged to meet over at DI Headquarters building. And I introduced myself. I reminded her of that case, which was then years earlier, and Angela remembered. So what I told her was, look, I'm working on another project. And would you be willing to help? And she said, well, yeah, I'll be willing to help. And I said, the lawyers tell me there's only one problem with it. The predicated information on this case, the information that I put into the target envelope is classified. And they're not going to let me work at work on this. I have to do it from home. I said, I can't take classified home. And Angela says, well, that's no problem, Scott. She says, just make up your target envelope. We'll put it under the desktop calendar on my desk. I'll go home at night and take a hot bath, and I'll do it from there. Like, what? Okay. So, again, I didn't tell Angela anything. I told her I was working on a project. I didn't even tell her I was working on an investigation. And that's the way she prefers to work. Don't tell her a thing. If you tell her things, she has to use the right side of her brain, and that just confuses her. She doesn't want to do analysis. She just wants to do her thing. So I made my target envelope and sealed it twice, signed my name over it to make sure that it couldn't be opened without my knowledge, put it under her desktop calendar, and I think it was the next day. Here's what she said. And keep in mind, again, I hadn't told her anything. She got a meeting between 2 or 3 people. One was an American named William. She thought that the meeting was either in the Philippines or in Thailand, but she thought it was in Thailand. She had there was a Russian presence in the meeting and a general officer. And I thought, wow, it sounds like she hit the target. But at the same time, I thought, well, there could have been a lot of meetings between Americans and Russians way back when. And Angela knew it. The meeting had occurred years earlier. So I thought, well, I knew a lot about the general. I knew a lot. I knew his first and last name. I knew his background. I knew what he had done in the past. I knew a lot about him. So what I did, I asked Angela, just tell me more about this Russian. And she gave me his first and last name.
Whoa.
Think about that. It just about knocked me off my chair. I couldn't believe it. And then I realized, wow, she's really on target. So we started working. I think Angela did a total. Angela had some surgery scheduled for the beginning of 2005, so she had to put it off for a couple of months. But then between then and the end of May of 2005, I think we did a total of 4 sessions. And during those sessions, again, she gave me the name William for the American. And she said, I asked her once, where's he stationed? And she said, well, what I'm getting is J in a box. Remember that, Angela? J in a box. I said, well, what does that mean? She says, I don't know. That's just what I'm getting. Well, I know Asia. So I eventually asked her, well, could that be Japan? And she said, yeah, that could be Japan. I think he's in Japan. I said, okay. But she wasn't real sure. But it was J in the box she was sure of. Then she told me, even though he is stationed at J in the box, his records seem to be kept in a specific state on the west coast of the United States. And she named the state. And communications about him seemed to flow from that state to Japan, to J in the box.
Wow.
Oh, okay. This actually made some sense to me. I'm a former military guy anyway. And in the military, if you're a specialist in something, you could be assigned one place, but detailed to another. And your detail could be for a full year or more. So this made some sense to me. Then she told me he's no longer in the military. He retired, by 2005. He's retired. And she told me the city and the state in which he's living in 2005.
Whoa.
Well, I still couldn't identify the guy. So now I had the name William. I knew his rank. So I went to the Defense Manpower Data Center and I asked them to print out for me every military male with that name and that rank. And there were only 127 of them. But I didn't know who it was. And these 127 are all over the world. I had to narrow it down. So one day I asked Angela, in hoping to narrow it down, I said, Angela, can you tell me where this guy went after the meeting? Now, my thought was she's going to say J in the box or Japan. But instead, what she said was, oh, well, a few days after the meeting, he came back here. I said, what do you mean, came back here? She said, well, he flew into New York and then he came down to Washington, D.C. for a meeting. I thought, whoa. Now, what was interesting about that is, again, I travel a lot. And you know that when you come back into the United States, you go through passport control and they slide your passport through over a machine and all that data goes into a database called TEX. So what Angela just gave me was a means to identify the guy. She didn't know that. I don't think.
Wow.
So I took this list of 127 names and I took it to the FBI, my buddy Tony Buckmeyer. Now, it was his agent who had originally worked the case in 98. I didn't tell Tony I was working with Angela this time. And I asked him to have somebody run the 127 names through text. He got back to me a couple of days later. He said, well, there's only one guy. And he came into New York a few days after your time frame. Okay. So now I had the guy's full name. I had his date of birth and social security number. So I started doing my homework on this guy. And I found that he was stationed in Japan at the time of the meeting, but he was actually detailed to Japan. His full-time assignment was in the state that Angela had told me it was in. He was retired, and he was living in the city and the state that Angela said he was living in 2005.
That's crazy.
Oh, it gets better. Now, Angela was frequently making comments about the guy's appearance, which didn't mean much to me at the time. I wasn't really paying that much attention to it, but I did at this point. So I asked her, Angela, how do you know what he looks like? And she said, well, Scott, during my sessions, I'm sort of floating above him. I'm looking directly at the general, but William's over here. I'm seeing him in profile. I said, well, can you change your point of view so you can look directly at him? She said, well, yeah. And so one of my buddies at DIA was a former Army CID, Criminal Investigation Division, NCO. And I asked Angela, well, listen, you know what a police sketch artist is? Yeah. She said, well, could you do that? Would you like to do that? And she said, oh, that would be fun. So we took it down to the CID office. I think it was at Fort Myer.
Fort Belvoir. It was a Fort
Oh,
Belvoir.
it was at Belvoir. You're right. And she sat down with an NCO with a program called Faces. It's a software program
Right.
they use to construct faces. So Angela created a face. And when she got done, she showed it to me. And she says, well, we couldn't get the ears to work right. And his hair's parted on the other side of his head. But otherwise, this looks just like the guy. Okay. I went through a system that we call NLITs to the DMV in the state where he resided. And I asked them to send me a photograph of this guy. They sent me 2 photographs, one with a full beard and the other one clean shaven. And I'm telling you, Grizz, when you compared the clean shaven photograph to her sketch, it was identical. It was like she opened it on top of the guy's photograph. Now, I still wasn't absolutely convinced. I wanted one more test. There was a time I had asked Angela once, I said, Angela, if I put a name in the target envelope, can you tell me if that guy's a spy? And she says, no, I don't think so. But if you put some names in an envelope, I can tell you who's not a spy. And that didn't make any sense to me, but it made sense to her. So I said, okay. So what I did is I took the DMV photo of this guy and his name was underneath it. And I made a target envelope out of it. And I called Angela up and I said, listen, I just dropped something into our internal mail for you. It's a target envelope on a different project, a brand new project. I just want you to do a session on this. Tell me what you think. I don't think it was a couple hours later, Angela called me up and she was so excited. She could hardly control herself. She said, Scott, that's him. She said, as soon as I touched it, I knew it was him, the man who met with the general. And she opened the target envelope, which is something I don't think Angela had ever done before. But she had to do it. She opened it up and looked at it and said, that's the guy.
Wow.
Now I've got a suspect, right? And
See, I'm getting this feedback for the first time. I didn't know that. I didn't know that the picture we drew matched, and I didn't know about this. He went to New York. I didn't. This is feedback for me. So we were okay. I just remembered I remembered the picture, and I kept saying, "Well, the part when I would see him, the part was on the other side, but it could have been the way I got the part."
And
the
his ears were different.
side.
They couldn't get the ears to work on faces. In any event, what did I do next? Oh, well, again, I've been around the military forever, right? So I knew how these things worked, and I had a top secret SCI clearance. So did Angela. And I knew that our suspect had a top secret SCI clearance as well when he was in the military. And very often when people leave the military and they go into the civilian world, they want to get a job, they'll use that clearance. And, they'll apply for a job that requires that kind of clearance, and that gives them a foot in the door. If people apply and they don't have a clearance, well, hell, it takes forever to get a clearance. If you walk in and say, I've already got the clearance, boom, they'll hire you. So I wanted to know whether or not this guy had done that. So I ran some queries on a system and determined that sure enough, Department of Justice had requested the Office of Personnel Management is the office in the government that coordinates all these background investigations, okay, OPM. Department of Justice had asked OPM to conduct a special background investigation on this guy. And I think it was in the spring of 2004. I thought, holy cow, Justice. Now it's time for me to talk to Tony Buckmeyer over at the FBI. Again, it was originally his case on his squad. I called Tony and I reminded him of what I had done on the Whisper case with Angela Ford. And I said, Tony, I did it again. And I reminded him what the case was. He remembered what the case was. I said, well, I sent this thing over and I asked him to I said, this guy that I identified works for DOJ someplace. We need to find out where. Tony got back to me like very quickly. And now he's dead serious. And he says, Scott, you got to write up a detailed memo detailing absolutely everything that you did on this case. This guy was working for an FBI office.
Oh,
Now, I won't tell you what his position was, but he was working for the FBI and he still had that level of clearance. So now Tony was really upset. Well, I wouldn't say upset, but he was anxious. So I wrote up like an 18-page memo, single spaced,
wow.
detailing the history of the Stargate program, then all the way through the Whistleblower effort and all the way through this effort, 18 pages. And I sent it over to Tony. And then I had to wait. I knew that he was going to submit it up his chain and it would take forever. It took about 3 months. And I finally got a phone call from a female FBI agent that I'd known in the mid-90s. I'd worked with her on a case. And by 2005, she was a fairly senior person. And she calls me up and she says, before she said anything else, she goes, "Scott, what are you doing to me?" And I recognized her voice. I hadn't heard her for, I don't know, 6-7 years, but I knew who it was. And she said that she got this memo for action. She was going to assign it to one of her agents. And she said, I want to make sure this is not an official referral from DIA. I said, no, it's just from me. She said, okay, well, we regard this as an internal matter. And since this is just a personal referral from you, we're not going to tell you anything about the investigation, and you're not allowed to ask. Now, I'd been in the business forever, and so I understood that. I mean, I kind of anticipated that. So I said, fine, that's okay, just so somebody's working it. So a year and a half went by. I hadn't heard a word. And Angela would tell you, I called Angela probably 2 or 3 or 4 times in that time frame. I'd get anxious worrying about it, and I'd say, Angela, this is a big deal. I'd say, if we're right, if we're wrong, they'll never listen to us again. I said, if we're right, the FBI has hundreds of unsub cases on the books, unsolved. I said, this is going to open up a brand new tool for them to work. This is a big deal. And every single time Angela would say, Scott, don't worry about it. This is the guy. That's the guy. She says, I've already put it out of my mind. Don't worry. So, about 18 months later, I had to go up to CIA for a big interagency meeting. We had a big conference room, like 30 people, and we're waiting for the big kahunga, whoever that was going to be, to show up to run the meeting. And it turned out to be Susan, the FBI agent. I couldn't believe it. I mean, Susan was supposed to be in another state, and here she is in Washington. So I went up to her and, hey, Susan, how you doing? I haven't seen you for so long. Didn't say a word about this case, and neither did she. Okay, so I sat down. We go through our meeting. The meeting's over, and I thought, well, I'll go say goodbye to Susan. So I went over, and I found out that she'd been detailed to FBI headquarters for 18 months, and that's why she was in town. And then she pulls me aside, and she says, hey, regarding that case, listen, here's what we did. She said, every new FBI employee has to be polygraphed before they're hired.
Right.
And so we asked our polygraph examiners to look at his polygrams, and they did, and they were satisfied that he ran a good exam. And that was it. They closed the case. I said, whoa, wait a minute. I said, Susan, I've been around forever. I've won national awards. I've personally identified 4 suspects as possible spies who were subsequently convicted of espionage. Okay. So I was an experienced guy. I knew what I was doing. The biggest spy, I guess, at least that the public ever became aware of that I caught was Ana Montes, the Cuban spy.
Really?
DIA. I personally identified Ana as a spy and ran that case with the FBI. And Ana had defeated our polygraph in 1994. Now, by then, she had had more than 200 meetings with Cuban intelligence officers and provided classified information to them personally. She had traveled clandestinely to Cuba several times. She'd been working for the Cubans for 10 years already, and then she took our polygraph and passed. So I told Susan, I said, you cannot rely on a polygraph. You can't do that. I mean, the minimum you should do is pull the guy in and ask him, show him a picture of this general. Ask him, did you meet with this guy at a certain location, certain time frame? Yes or no? If he says no, fine. Then give him an issue polygraph. See, there's a difference between broadly scoped polygraph exams and specific issue polygraph exams.
Right.
Any examiner will tell you they have more confidence in the results of a specific issue exam than they do in a broadly scoped exam. So, you can ask somebody, hey, have you ever committed murder? And they'll say, no, and they'll pass. But you ask them, look, were you on the corner of 5th Street and Main Street last Friday night at 9 p.m. and did you shoot this guy with that gun at that time and then polygraph him? He won't pass the exam because it's very specific. Correct. And polygraph examiners will tell you they have no psychological wiggle room to fool around with that. You're very specific. So I told her, you need to pull this guy in. Well, that was it. And I had no leverage. If this had been an official DIA request, I could have pulled the, hey, this is DIA card. You got to do it. But it was just coming from me. And they knew that. So that's the way it was left. Now, my wife will tell you that I'm the kind of guy I can't let go of this. This was like 18 years ago.
I can remember right? You got in touch with me with the polygraph, and and you were so disappointed.
Well, I've contacted the FBI 3 times since then, encouraging them to just pull the guy in. And I know that he was still employed by them at least until 7 or 8 years ago. He may be employed today. I don't know. I just don't know.
That is crazy.
Well, I actually have reason to believe that he's still there. But as recently as yesterday, I called FBI headquarters just asking for a status report, and they won't call me back. I'll guarantee you, and Angela, I'm sure will tell you the same thing. We got the right guy. We got the right guy. And he's been working for the FBI. Well, he worked for the FBI for at least 8 years that I'm aware of, and possibly a lot longer than that. He may still be with them, and I'm still pushing him. I've told him, you're irresponsible. All I'm asking you to do is pull a guy in for a 2-minute interview, show him a picture, ask him one question. That's all. And even at that, you'll have your answer because he's going to shit his pants in front of you.
That's right.
And you'll know, and you may not be able to convict him, but at least you'll know. And trying to get them to, and Grizz, I followed this pattern throughout my career with them. I'm sorry to say that. I love the FBI. I think they're the greatest FBI. They're the greatest investigative organization in the world when they get going on something. But there have been many occasions when I've told them, hey, you need to be looking at this. And I've had to fight tooth and nail. And I've always been right. And I can tell you after the very first spy that I caught at DIA, it was a situation like that. The FBI had already looked at the case, and I told them, no, I think espionage has occurred there. I'll make a long story short. I identified as a suspect, a DIA employee. My partner and I flew down to Lima, Peru, confronted him, got his confession, brought him back, turned him over to the FBI, and then he was convicted. And I told the Bureau at that time, I said, since this guy did what he did, we can anticipate that this other government, Ecuador, is going to do something to us in the not too distant future. And I told them why I believed that. Sure enough, it was about 1.5 years later. We got some reporting which indicated that sure enough, the government of Ecuador had gotten their hands on some of our information. I went to the FBI. I went to Tony's squad. Tony wasn't the squad leader at that time. He was just a junior guy. I went to Tony though, and he went to his boss and came back to me and said, hey, I'm sorry, but the boss says too little for us to open up a case on. And so what I told him was, Tony, you tell your boss that a 1.5 years ago, you guys turned me down 5 times when I asked you to open the case. I had to fly down to Lima, Peru, bring the suspect back over here and turn him over to you. And I didn't say a word. And you guys took all the credit. But I said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do this time. I'm going to fly to Quito, Ecuador. I'm going to find the guy who did this. I'm going to bring him back this time. I'm not going to shut my mouth. I'm going to embarrass the hell out of you.
Oh, wow.
10 minutes later, he called me back and said, we're opening up a case. And he flew down to Quito with me and their most senior polygraph examiner. And we found the guy.
Wow.
My point is, though, is that they just didn't listen. They wouldn't listen. And I had that experience over and over and over and over and over with them. And every time I turned out to be right. So, I'm not just a guy who's walking in off the street with some crazy idea that this FBI employee might have been a spy. I mean, I can understand them blowing that off. But with my background, with all the spies I've caught, the national level awards that I've received for catching spies, more than one, with my track record, they should be listening to me. And
Absolutely.
they won't want to listen to Angela. They've got this blind spot, just like I did back in 1999. But they should listen to me, and they just haven't so far. But I'm not giving up. And I've told them, when I find out that this guy has finally retired, I said, you may not talk to him, but by God, I'm going to knock on his door and tell him I know exactly what he did, just so I can see the look on his face. I want him to know that somebody knows what he did. So in any event, that's kind of my story now. Angela and I have done some other things.
We've done some other things.
And we've had a great time. And I only wish that I'd had a few more good cases like that I could have worked.
And there were a lot that we worked that we just couldn't. It went nowhere, and that happens too. Because even when the psychic when the psychic program existed, when it formally existed, we would work cases that would just kind of not go anywhere. So you're not always 100% on or whatever.
Right. Well, I can tell you one though, that where you gave me some information. In general sense, this was during Operation Iraqi Freedom, so 2003. We had very good, reliable information, which indicated that an American military officer was providing real-time intelligence to the Russians during Operation Iraqi Freedom. I mean, very specific information and timely. Certain aircraft would be taken off from an aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf, headed for a specific target, and he would have that information to the Russians, and the Russians would get that back to Moscow before the strike occurred. Wow. This is very, very serious stuff. A lot of people were working on this case, lots of people. We weren't getting anywhere. And so I did a session with Angela on this, and I don't know if Angela would remember. She probably doesn't remember. But what she told me was the person we were looking for, I think you said he lived in Ohio, and I think it might have been near Cleveland or someplace. I can't remember. You named a city, and you said he lived near water, and so I'm looking at maps and I'm trying to figure out all this stuff. What else did you give me? I don't recall, but not enough information to identify a suspect. So there was a case where, it just didn't work out.
There were a lot of those. But I guess we don't have time tonight. But Scott helped catch Anna Montez, and he wrote a book on it. But
I saw that in your bio or something. Yes.
Yeah, true believer.
True believer. Right. And he wrote a book. It's a Kindle book on what we did. It's called Unconventional Method. But Scott, would you come back and talk about the Anna Montez case? Because that was a beautiful. Sure. Can you come back and talk about the Grizzly?
I can. No, Angela, I didn't work with Angela on that case. And
no,
people don't
we didn't
believe
know
that,
each
by
other
the way.
at the time.
I worked with Angela on that case in 1999, and then in the fall of 2000, I identified Anna Montez as a spy, and people said, "Oh, you must have been working with Angela Ford."
You know what? No. But you had an idea. But you were on to Anna Montez before you arrested her. So
yeah.
See, I worked Scott's case through Carl Glassbrenner, so I never met Scott. All I know, I'm working this case, but I never met Scott. So then he decided at one point he was going to introduce himself. He says, and he goes, "Well, do you remember the case with Baker and the Australian?" And I go, "Yeah, I remember because I do so many." And then when you work psychically, you're right. Your memory turns off. There's a switch in the brain that turns off. It's like your memory, so you can't remember but I remembered that case. So and they goes, "Well, that case was a success." Like 5 years later, I find out that they identified the guy, they arrested him.
Well, I'll tell you this about one more thing about the Whistle Air case. I realized later on that if only I had had confidence in Angela at that time. Again, I hadn't met her. This is my first experience with a psychic, and I had no idea how you task them, how you can follow up with questions or not. No idea. And so after the case was over, I realized that if only I had listened to Angela, I could have identified Whisper in a heartbeat. Because, and here's how. She told us that he was an Australian. We knew the guy had access to imagery, right? Because that's what he gave up. Well, again, our sister agency in Canberra is the DIO. DIA had a liaison officer assigned to the DIO, to their imagery analysts. I knew that guy. All I would have had to do, and the Singaporean military officer said, hey, this guy, whoever he is, he's a bodybuilder. He looks like a real muscle-bound guy in his late 20s. So all I had to do is pick up the phone. If I had called our liaison officer and said, hey, I'm looking for an Australian imagery analyst, and here's what he looks like, late 20s bodybuilder. As it turned out later on, Australia at the time only had about 100 imagery analysts, and all but 2 of them were retired Army imagery analysts. They were all in their 50s and 60s. They had only recently hired 2 young guys. One of them was Whisper. He was a bodybuilder, and everybody knew it. And our liaison's officer's daughter dated the guy.
Oh.
If I had picked up the phone and said, I'm looking for this guy, he'd have known who it was, just like that. I could have gotten a photograph of him, shown it to the Singaporean military officer, and he'd have said, yeah, that's the guy. And we'd have had him, boom.
But, I said he was on steroids. You remember that? I kept picking up drugs. And it was steroids. I was picking up drugs, and it was a steroid. So I think, but you didn't know. I mean, listen, you know,
drinking stuff. Yeah.
What whenever when I caught the customs agent that went bad, I said he was in Wyoming, and customs didn't believe me. Nobody believed me. He was a customs agent that went bad. Right. Everybody had him in Florida, the Caribbean. Yeah. So I said, oh no, he's in Wyoming. Oh well, he's not in Wyoming. Well, he was in Wyoming. He was like 100. Yes. I said, you better go get him because he's moving from the location. So when our people went to customs, they said, oh, he's moving west from Lovell. And the customs guy said, they go, as we are speaking, we are apprehending Charles Jordan 100 miles west of Lovell, Wyoming. And I explained the Indian burial ground. Yeah. Okay.
Angela told him, well, he's living in a silver trailer in a campground. The entrance to the campground, there's a huge rock, and next to that, there's an Indian burial ground. Yeah, outside of Lovell, Wyoming.
That is insane.
And she was absolutely right.
So now we don't think so. This guy was on the 10 most wanted. There was a card from Yellowstone that I saw the guy. So DIA sits back. We didn't take any credit for the case. It was that was a nice job, Angela. It kind of blew everybody's mind.
They initially didn't listen. They didn't listen to Angela. They blew it off. And then a few weeks later, he sent his mother a letter with a photograph, kind of proof of life, saying, Mom, I'm still alive and I'm okay. And in the background, there was a car with a Wyoming license plate on there. So they came back to Angela saying, hey, what did you say about this guy being in Wyoming? And Angela says, well, you better move fast. He's moving west trying to get out of state. He was.
So what happened is that so anyway, it was nice for Stargate, and it was like, okay, we can do this. So now it was this was on the 10 Most Wanted TV show. So the case was not classified. It was not a classified case.
Right.
But you know, so in 1995, the BBC gets a hold of the case, and they do a whole reenactment of it for the Discovery Channel.
No kidding.
So BBC from England flies the whole way from England over to Washington, D.C. They want to do a reenactment of the case. They called Customs to see if they could use one of their helicopters, and Customs like, hell no, you're not. And then they called DIA, and they wanted to talk to me, which everybody just freaked out because I'm still working as an analyst. But see, that wasn't my fault because it was an open case, and by that time the program was declassified. So they did the reenactment. So the guy from Customs, who was the guy who we told where he was, we said, yeah, we said, it's a good thing. He said, oh yeah, the mother sent the picture. We saw the Wyoming. So we went looking for him. So anyway, I don't know how it was, but we felt that we shouldn't take credit for the case. And the Customs guy said, are you crazy? It was because of you. Yeah. We found him. And he said, we did not believe he was in Wyoming, but whenever when we saw his picture with the Wyoming, we went right up into that area. The FBI started to send just pictures and pictures and pictures of him. And there was a whole focus. Yeah. And that's why they think they found a guard caught him. But even my bosses were upset with Customs because they said it's a rural area. Just send, put an FBI agent on an airplane and just stay in a cheap hotel and just look for him. But that was another case. It was like, I think we found him in 88 or 89. And in 1995, we finally got the credit. And Dale Graff was with me. And we're like, Dale, we did it.
Well, I'll tell you, Grizz, like I said, I was originally a skeptic, and Angela turned me into a true believer. And I was so taken by this that one day I was at home watching TV on a weekend, and I was going through the directory trying to find something to watch, and I saw something that was called Psychic Detectives. Okay, so I thought, well, that's interesting. So I turned on this 30-minute show, and it was about a psychic up in New Jersey named Nancy Weber, how she had helped the police to find a murderer. And she had told them his name, told them a lot about the suspect. But when I watched that show, I thought, wow, I need this person too. So I talked to my boss, the chief of security at DIA, Drew Winneberger. He's the guy who hired me back in 88. He had a lot of confidence in me by the time I did all this. And I told him that I'd like to contact her. So he says, oh yeah, go ahead, Scott, take a G car, drive up to New Jersey if you want during the day. And so she had a website, and I contacted her on the website and made an appointment. So I'll try to make this fairly brief. I made an appointment for 4:30. Now, she had appointments up until 5 o'clock, and I was the 4:30 appointment. So I knew I didn't have a lot of time. So I just introduced myself and told her who I am, what I do for a living, and asked her if she'd be willing to help us. And I said, look, there's some conditions. You can't ever tell anybody that DIA asked you to help on anything. We will not acknowledge it, even if you do, and we can't pay you a nickel. And she said, well, that's fine. That's what I do with all law enforcement. So it was the end of the day, and I had this case in mind that I wanted her to work on. It was another Cuba case, an unsub case. And so she said, well, do you have time right now? Are you working on something? I said, well, yeah, but I didn't have a target envelope or anything. And she said, well, give me a couple minutes. And we just sat there. And then she started talking, and she started telling me stuff that I already knew about this unsub case. Details, and talked for 2 hours. And I'm taking notes like crazy. And at the end of it, she got tired, and she said, Scott, I'm really tired. There's one more thing I want to tell you, but I need a couple of minutes rest. So she just kind of did one of these things, And I sat back. I hadn't said a word for 2 hours, but at the time, we were working this other case, this Russian case, Operation Rocky Freedom. I sat back and I thought to myself, damn it, if I'd known that she was this good, I'd have brought this other case to her. Nancy looked over at me and she says, Scott, are you working something else? And I said, well, I work a lot of cases. She says, I'm getting a lot of Russia off of you right now. I hadn't said a word. But, well, yeah, I was thinking about another case, and she starts lecturing me. She says, don't ever do that. She says, if we're working on something together, you got to focus on one issue at a time. Right, if you introduce something out, you'll just confuse me. I hadn't said a word at all. And Nancy made
That's why you split the targets. That's why you have to take, if you have pictures in an envelope, you take the one that you're working on, you have to separate that.
Yeah.
Or you'll just,
It's confusing.
Wow.
Well, yeah.
But Scott did. I mean, the Anna Montes case is just the whole. Can he come back and talk about Anna Montes and how he found out?
Let me tell you something, Angela and Mr. Carmichael. You all have an open door to my show or our show, Ginette and myself, at any time. It is a part of history that we do not know about.
Right.
And, you know, I tell you right now, my dad is the same way. He's like, oh, you know, about psychics. I'm like, Dad, no, man, they are for real. I mean, if you get a hold of a true psychic or medium, they are for real.
It's for real.
And a lot depends on the case. You know, a lot depends too, like on the case. I call it if the signal's strong enough, you're going to get the information. I call it the signal. But, you know, like sometimes the signal just isn't that strong. I mean, and you're not going to get anything. So it's not that there's so much that goes into receiving the information. It has to, you have to be stimulated. I need to be stimulated. The signal has to be strong.
And Angela told me once that, you know, if she's got some people around her who are very skeptical, that makes it more difficult for her because she has to deal with that too. Even if they don't say a word, she senses it. And one of the reasons that I think she enjoyed working with me was that I was open-minded and eager. You know, it's like, give me good accurate information.
He just didn't know any better.
Yeah, I didn't know.
He knew nothing.
Sometimes ignorance is best.
So yeah. And then he came back. He goes, "Oh yeah, I'm Scott, and you know, by the way, we apprehended that guy, and he's in jail." And I'm like, "Now you tell me." 5 years later,
I'd like to tell you another little story if you've got some time. Okay,
absolutely.
This is not an investigation, but this demonstrates what we're talking about. One day, we got a new employee in my office, an investigator, and his name is Vic. Okay, Vic was a retired Army NCO investigator, and he came in my office, and somebody told him about my work with Angela. So Vic walks up to me one day, and he says, "Hey, Scott, I wonder if you would introduce me to Angela." And I said, "Well, no." I said, "Angela's not a sideshow. This ain't a circus act." And she'll sense right away, she'll sense right away your interest, and she won't like that. So no, I'm not going to do that. He says, "Well, listen, one day when he was still in the Army, he was attending a big conference. And after the conference was over, a female NCO walked up to him, introduced herself, and she said, 'Look, this might make you laugh, but I happen to be psychic. And did you know that you have an angel, a guardian angel over your shoulder?' And Vic's like, 'What?' So she said, 'Yeah, there's a little old man,' and she described him. And Vic said he realized that she was talking about an uncle, his favorite uncle, who had died just a couple of years earlier.
Wow.
And it kind of, scarred him a little bit. And so he told me that, and I said, 'Absolutely not. I'm not going to introduce you to Angela. It's not fair to her.' So one day, weeks later, Vic and I had to go attend a social function at the Officers Club on Bowling Air Force Base. And it was a nice day, so we decided to walk. So we're walking down this long sidewalk, and way at the other end of the sidewalk, I saw Angela coming our way.
We just left the Officers Club because we were planning my retirement party.
Well, so it had to be around 2010. And we're walking there, and I said, 'Vic, this is your lucky day. That's Angela. I'll introduce you to her.' So we get up there, and Angela, hey, how you doing? I hadn't seen Angela for months. Hey, so good. By this way, this is my new colleague, Vic. Angela shakes his hand, and she says, 'Vic, you and I need to talk sometime.' And Vic says, 'Oh, why? About what?' And she says, 'Did you know you had a guardian angel?' And she describes this old man just the way Vic had described it to me weeks earlier.
Wow.
So
which all of a sudden it made me a believer in guardian angels. And you know what?
Speaking of guardian angels, I marked it down at 1:10:05 on our live feed. There was an orb that floated in front of you.
Me?
Yes, Mr. Carmichael. So when you go back and watch the video, look at 1:10:05, and you will see the orb float right down. It wasn't dust, because we will see dust.
Well, I'll tell you something else. when I was back working with Angela, I once told her that I didn't want to hear anything about myself. You know, I work on cases. That's why I want accurate information. But if you sense that I'm going to get hit by a bus tomorrow, I don't want to hear about it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm the same way. Absolutely. Yeah.
Years later, this isn't all that long time ago, after I was retired, back in about 2018 or so, I finally broke down and I sent Angela an email. I said, Angela, can you tell me whether I have any guardian angels?
Oh, yeah. I gave you a reading. Yes, I did. I
And
emailed it.
her response was, Scott, they're so glad that you asked. One of them is
Wow.
Cherub, and the other one is Lewis. He's like a, I don't know, what would you call Lewis?
More serious.
Like an avenging angel.
He's your writer. He's your writer.
And he's the law and order, the justice kind of guy. And she says, you know, if you were ever in a case and you were getting really tired, and then all of a sudden you got this burst of energy and you realize you're on the right track, that was Lewis. And the other one is a cherub. What's the cherub's name, Pam? Lewis and, can you remember? I can't remember. Sorry. Christopher. And Christopher, I'm sorry, Christopher. He's a cherub who sleeps on my shoulder, and I think he gives me my sense of humor.
He helps me.
And he helps my wife sometimes when she asks for his help.
Wow, that is impressive.
Anyway, if there was an orb that flew past me, it was probably either Lewis or Christopher.
Yeah, 110.05.
But I got some good information on you. When I did the reading, it's what did I say? You were a communicator, you were a writer.
Yes.
And other things that you like another.
Angela explained to me that they were assigned to me when I was born, and two of them because I had two missions to accomplish in life and that I had not yet accomplished them. And this is after I'd caught, I don't know how many spies.
Wow.
So, I don't know what it is I'm supposed to do, but I guess I haven't done it yet.
Well, let's hope that you don't do it.
But it was a joy to work with Scott because he just didn't know anything. So, you know, he'd talk and I'd say, well, we can do it this way. But it was fun. I had a good time with him. I had a real good time with him.
Yeah, we had a good time.
And
how in the world did you go home knowing that you're trying to work with the psychic, right? That you don't believe in? I mean, what was running through your mind?
The first time?
Yes.
It was just interesting. I was absolutely flabbergasted that she came up with this, you know, security's trying to identify someone in a counterintelligence investigation. I mean, I was just absolutely floored. I had no idea how she got that. But the rest of the information didn't seem to match up. It wasn't what I was looking for. And one thing I've learned in working with Angela is how ignorant I was about how you work with a psychic. You've got to make sure that you don't lead them on with a question, because that causes them to use another part of their brain that they don't need to be using or they shouldn't be using. And so I've learned how to ask questions, what questions I can ask. And I think I became much more effective in working with her that way. And that's why I wish I had some more cases like that I could work, because I know better now how to task and how to follow up with questions, what I can ask, what I can't ask, you know?
Well, you know what, Scott? Sometimes we miss, sometimes we work missing people. Ginette's father was a well-known, Ginette has found people on the spot.
Yeah.
But sometimes, I don't know. Sometimes I work with Ginette. Sometimes I work with Dale Graff. If anything, you want to work with him sometime, Ginette?
Oh yeah, I love this stuff. You know, well,
yeah.
I like the feedback. You know, even though it's 5 years later, you can get a confirmation. You know, oh, you did great. You know, I'm not trying to whistle my bell, but you know, the way that Carmichael says, oh, this is the way I worked it. I did a military job for a foreign government when my dad was overseas for them. And so I was like, I don't know, 50 maybe. I don't remember. But what was interesting was they called and said, we have this missing man. And I said, okay. And they said, he's a soldier. Can you pinpoint him? I said, well, give me his name.
Uh-oh.
Lost
Are you
her.
still there? Yeah, this storm across America is really bad. So while she's tuning back in, Bob Perry just asked Angela.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Okay,
You
so
know what? A lot of people in very high position. What we have found out that a lot of people that work for large organizations that do very well, like as they like climb the corporate ladder, we found that a lot of these people are very high in intuition and psychic abilities.
Well, didn't Ronald Reagan have one, and Nancy?
I think that was an astrologer, to my knowledge.
They
What
had an
was it
astrologer,
astrology?
and they denied her. They denied her after they found out. They denied knowing
Yeah.
her.
Yeah, but I know she was
Just
darn
a shame.
good. But anyway, so I just want to say this real quick. So what I heard Dale Graff say something to the effect that, for example, he was talking about numbers and that kind of thing, because I sometimes get numbers. And what's interesting, because I got to go to Angela's house. She's not that far from me. And we got to sit down and play the horses for fun, because I get colors and numbers and that kind of thing. And I'm sure she does too. But if we work it right, we can certainly have a lot of fun with winning on the horses. It's almost as if you have to do all these protocols and figure out which time it works, when it works, how it works, and is it compatible with people like you, Mr. Carmichael? Because when I did the case for the foreign government, I said the missing soldier is right here, and they called me and said, okay, tomorrow morning at 4 a.m. we're going out with like 4 Blackhawks, and we're going to go in and get him. Are you sure he's right there? And now, so Angela goes, oh, just this is what I got, and that's it. And I said to them, it was a general, and I said, honestly, it hasn't changed. He's right there. I'm not going to make up something that's not there. And so they went in, and when they got there, they found a cigarette in an ashtray. And apparently, you know how it is over in foreign countries, they have tunnels and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And just as a comparison, and they took the cigarette, and the DNA matched the soldier. So yeah, so that was really super cool, because I was in Richmond, Virginia, and they were not Europe, but a general idea. They're over there. And so I find it interesting. I know this sounds goofy, but I've been reading up on protocols and all these different methods, and all these different firms are finding out.
I didn't hit a button, ladies and gentlemen. The only thing I'm doing is using some backup power. So, yeah, she must be gone and out. But no, I think that you all brought up a couple of good points. And I think Ginette, hopefully she can come back in and tune in anytime. But that would be an awesome another show about how to work with the psychic and how to, interact. Because a lot of people don't really understand that. And I went on a psychic mission, and I went and I interviewed, I don't know how many psychics, right? And I learned a whole lot about them. Unfortunately, I didn't get anyone that tried to pull the wool over my eyes, right? Angela has always been spot on with me. I never asked a question about anything like you said, Mr. Carmichael. Mm-hmm. And we have psychics that are, with Ginette, that's on our board or administration team. And out of the blue, I'll get emails, be like, hey, Grizzly, just give you a heads up, you're going to have to go to the dentist and get your tooth fixed next month and all this other stuff. I used to laugh at it. Yeah. Like, whoa, no, I don't laugh anymore. No. When they say something, I listen. So, yeah, absolutely. Ginette, are you back? Ginette? Yeah, she's having a rough time, but that would be great.
You have to be careful about your expectations when you begin to work with somebody.
That is correct. I do agree with you on that. Yeah.
And you've got to be very flexible, very flexible. I remember one piece of information that Angela gave us about that guy who turned out to be with the FBI was that you thought he had a tattoo on one of his shoulders, and you even described it.
Yeah.
And when the FBI came back to me, they said, look, we've checked, and the guy's never had a tattoo on his shoulder. And I said, well, look, you sometimes you can't take it literally. Angela may be getting a sense of something, and she interprets it as a tattoo, but it's not literally a tattoo. Maybe it's just the way the guy feels about himself. You can't take everything literally, and you have to be very careful about that.
You are right.
What happened? But I said he could have had it removed. Remember that? I said he could have had it removed.
Yeah.
We don't know about the tattoo.
Right. I mean, I wasn't worried about that anyway. I knew we had the right guy. That's all I cared about. I mean, and here's how I explained it to him. I told him, look, assume for the moment that Angela is a bunk, and this is all bunk. In that case, I just picked a name out of my hat. Okay, there's 1 million people in the United States military. I picked one name. And it so happens that he was stationed in Japan, like Angela said. He was actually assigned to a station on the West Coast in the exact state that Angela said. He was retired when Angela said, and he was living in the same city and state that Angela said he was. How do you account for all that? What are the odds against all of that? Just being random. The odds against that are billions to one.
Yeah.
Billions to one.
Yeah.
I said this, but if you know Angela's background and what she's done before, then it makes sense.
Well, and I always tell people too, Mr. Carmichael, is that, one thing I have learned with working with psychics and mediums and people with abilities like Angela and Ginette is that beware of the people that say, you have a curse, and for $500, I'll remove that curse from. It's like, come on, ladies and gentlemen, be real.
Yeah, it's not. It's receiving information.
Right.
Information. You're getting information.
The way I've explained it to others, and I may be wrong, is it's between her ears. I said it's organic. It's in her brain. Angela is wired a little bit differently than you and me. There's just something a little bit different, which enables her to receive information that I can't. And that's my understanding of it. And so it's not scary when you put it in those terms. Hey, there's nothing, no great spirit in the sky or anything that's giving her this information. It's just in her brain. So
that's how the brain works.
That's just how the brain works. Yeah.
No, it is. And I think it's great. I really do want you all back. What do you think next Friday, our next show? Would that work? 6 p.m. Eastern?
Next Friday? We don't have anything going on, do we? Yeah, I think that'll work.
Okay. I'll get everything set up.
I thought you were going to talk about the Ana Montes case.
There's no psychic element to it, but I can talk about the case.
It's an interesting case. So so they found her after you worked with me. So what did people think, that I helped you find Ana Montes?
Yeah, they figured, yeah. I said, what? I'm not capable of doing that on my own? Come on.
No, I didn't work. No, but it was interesting. The book was interesting. I did not know Ana Montes, but she worked on my floor, and I knew people that worked the Cuban issue, and they would say, there's something off about her, because every time they would do a policy on Cuba, because it was she would come in and want to change it, and they'd be, what? But the management liked her, and so they would change it.
Couldn't argue with it.
Wow.
And they were getting ready to promote her right up the system. Management loved her, but I knew people that worked the Cuban desk or the study group, and they'd say, she's off the wall. She's making decisions. It doesn't make sense. And yet, so she was getting her way. She was
believe me, I had a hard time convincing the FBI that she was the spy they were looking for, in part because they knew her, and she was the queen of Cuba.
Yeah, that's terrible.
They knew that she was working with their very senior people at the time on projects, and they couldn't believe that this could be a spy. Well, that's another story.
They were getting ready to move her right up the system, and year,
some reason, Angela, that is like becoming a hot topic on the show. I don't know what's going on in the world right now, because we're live. So send me an email, guys.
I don't know what you mean, but we'll figure it out.
GrizzlyTrueCrimes@gmail.com. That's GrizzlyTrueCrimes@gmail.com. And if Angela gets any information that comes to her, I will email you that information to you guys and let you know. So, but I think it's like the second or third question that was asked about that. So something's going on.
Well, we'll look forward to talking to you again next week.
Let's do the Ana Montes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And hey, once again, thank you for your time and your service, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Wonderful.
We'll see you next week then.
Absolutely. Angela, I tell you what, I cannot believe you. You are just hitting grand slams. People just love you to death. I mean, Mr. Carmichael is out of this world. I mean, it's unbelievable that we get to hear the actual true events that you all actually did behind closed doors. And to me, that's very interesting.
No, he's a good investigator. He was good. He caught a lot of spies.
Yeah, I can't wait. What was his book's name again?
Adam, okay, it was called True Believer.
True Believer, yeah. He was just saying in the background, True Believer. Yeah.
And then he wrote a book about us that was called, it's a Kindle book. It's either 99 cents or nothing. It's called Unconventional Method. But yeah, I mean, I had a lot of fun with him. And you're right. He was a little rogue because you had the FBI, you had State Department people. These people, they wore suits and they followed the rules, and they thought they were special. And then you have somebody coming from DIA. He was good. He was good, and he always surprised me.
Well, we always hear about stuff like this, and we always think they're rumors. We don't know if they're true or not. But to see Mr. Carmichael and to see you in action and hear the stories and everything, it's wild. Mr. Scarborough just said, thanks, Mr. Scott Carmichael, for an incredibly phenomenal show. He just signed off, so let's make sure and let him know that Scarborough said that to him.
Okay.
And go back and watch that orb. It just floats right in front of him. Right in front of the camera, in front of his face. 110.05. So absolutely. But Angela, we'll see you again on Friday next week.
Yeah, and it's a good story on Anna. Yeah, okay. I'm glad you're enjoying. Yeah, I'm loving it. I'm loving it.
Oh, the audience loves you. We got to figure something out. We got to talk to Ginette about you. So yes, check your emails and email me tonight. Okay.
What?
I said check your emails and email me tonight.
Okay.
Okay. Have a good one. Thanks,
too.
Angela. All right. Bye-bye. Man, ladies and gentlemen, I tell you what, we are live in northern Kentucky with no power, broadcasting. Interesting show with Ginette, Matisha Lucas, Grizzly, Angela Ford, and Scott Carmichael. I mean, this is like history that actually transpired that we are knowing about, and we're actually seeing the people and talking to the horse that actually happened and what they did. Now, unfortunately, we're not going to know all the facts, right? But it was interesting. But email me at any time, Grizzly True Crimes or Ginette or Angela Ford. It's grizzlytruecrimes@gmail.com. We'll absolutely respond back to you. I got another live show coming up in less than 10 minutes. My weather is terrible out here digging, USA. I'm out of power. I'm running on backups and use my cell phones as hotspots and everything else. But we were late, and we still made it. So lovely from coast to coast and around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, it's that time again tonight. We must say goodbye. But be safe out there. And about that train issue or concern, Angela will look into it. Email me. And whatever she finds out, I will definitely let you all know. Until then, take care. Digging, wow, yes. It is a wow factor for me as well. Have a good night, ladies and gentlemen.
Will be unavailable until tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. when the purge concludes. Blessed be our new founding fathers and America, a nation reborn. May God be with you all.